Thank you, Ali. As Ali mentioned, my name is Cami Iwata, and I'm here presenting with Brenda, my colleague, and we are from the Orange County Department of Education, Educational Services Division, Student Achievement and Wellness Unit. We provide alcohol and other drug prevention and to all of Orange County. So we are a comprehensive program that provides workshops, trainings, and curriculums to all that are involved in a youth's life. Brenda, do you want to press next slide? Our program consists of 3 components. It's an evidence-based student curriculum, life skills. We do a one-time parent workshop, and we also do a one-time staff training. With the student curriculum, like I mentioned, it's evidence-based. We do grade levels 4 to 6, Botman life skills in the elementary schools. And we also provide, as I mentioned, parent workshops and staff trainings throughout all of Orange County. On today's agenda and some of the topics that we will cover with our goal here today is to help you really understand some of the risk and protective factors that can influence youth substance use, learning about current drug trends and statistics, and help provide you with some strategies for what you can do, whether it's in your classroom or with your child. And at the end of our presentation, we'll provide you with some resources that you can also use, whether in the classroom, with your family. And we would love if anyone would like to share any great resources that you guys already know of or strategies that you have as well. We want to open that up towards the end. So as we go through the presentation, we have Ali that's going to be awesomely watching the chat. Let us know if you have any questions or anything for us as we go on. So as we start our presentation, our first thing that we really want to talk about when it comes to substance use is risk factors. So these would be conditions that increase risk of substance use. And so we have here 7 of the important ones that we found, and it's family history. With that being, chances of developing addiction are higher when a teen encounters other family members that use drugs. The perception of harm. So if there's a low perception of harm, more teens are willing to try something that they believe will not be harming them. So they're more likely to try it out, experiment with the different types of drugs. Mental health, when students are dealing with mental health issues such as anxiety, any other mental health disorder, a lot of times they may turn to drugs and alcohol as well. Another risk factor would be trauma and grief. Unsure of how to really deal with the stresses of trauma and grief, not having really good coping skills through these tough times sometimes can also lead some of our teens to turn to drugs and alcohol. Peer pressure and availability. There are so different methods of peer pressure nowadays. It's not only just face-to-face. We've seen it through cyberbullying. We've seen it through texting, social media. There's so many different social media platforms out there that students are using now. And that's how they experience a lot of different pressures as well. And if they find the availability of drugs and alcohol to be easy, they are more, since it's so easy to get, they're more likely to just be like, oh yeah, I can get it. Availability can be as easy as finding alcohol in your fridge because their parents drink. That it can be something simple as that. And then we look at a lot of low academic achievement and school connectedness. We find that students that are not doing well in school may not be engaged in school, participating in extracurricular, participating in sports or clubs. This can also tend to lead to substance use if they're not really feeling connected in that sense, and they're not doing well in school. So sometimes that can also be a big sign. And poor social skills. So these include the coping skills that I've mentioned before. A student is more likely to turn to drugs and alcohol if they do not have coping skills to help them when they are stressed, sad, or angry. They may also have poor other skills in tending to their goals and all of that. So next slide. The next slide is going to show us a graph, and this kind of gives us a little picture of how the teens have that low perception of harm that I just talked about, as well as the availability. And so we got these numbers from the California Healthy Kids Survey, the 2017 to 2019, otherwise known as CHICS. And so this data that we see here really goes to show us that we really focus on the marijuana, e-cigs, and alcohol, as those are 3 things that three substances we'll be talking about today as well, and how easy students think to obtain. These numbers are pretty high in the 60 percentile of easy to obtain, and also perceived harm. A lot of times, if either they don't know the dangers of it, or they just hear that it's not dangerous and it's fine, because of that knowledge of thinking that it's not hazardous to them, it doesn't harm them, they are more willing to try that as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that information, Cami. So as we move along through our presentation today, I would like for us to start with this question, right? So what part of the brain is last to fully develop? It's kind of just for us to get thinking about the brain and brain development. So if you think you know the response, or you know the response, or you want to take a guess, whatever it is, feel free to go ahead and place that in the chat. We'll give you a few seconds to kind of take a guess to the question, which is, again, what part of the brain is last to be fully developed? Okay, so we're going to move forward. Thank you for those who have entered any responses in the chat. So we see that the brain is fully developed once a person turns 25 years old, and the brain develops from back to front. So the answer to the question is the last part of the brain to develop is the front part, otherwise known as the prefrontal cortex. We see that this part of the brain is responsible for impulse control, decision-making, problem-solving, and otherwise known as the voice of reason. Many times we see that teens are very impulsive, or they make quick decisions without really understanding consequences or really thinking things through. And this could be part of could be part of that, right? Because the brain is not fully developed until they're about 25 years old. On the screen, we are going to compare the teen brain versus the adult brain. We see here on the left-hand side, we see the teen brain, right? We compare it to a highway, perhaps in LA, or a very busy city. It has a lot of overpasses, a lot of underpasses. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot going on. And that's kind of reflects the teen's life. We see that teenagers are in school, some are in sports and extracurriculars, and not to mention, you know, they have their friends, they have social pressures and peer pressure and school pressure from everywhere, and they have a lot going on. And we see that this matters because their brain is developing, their brain is trying to figure out, you know, how to make decisions, how to make the right choice, and who to listen to or who not to listen to, or peer pressure and things like that. As we get older, we see that the adult brain actually tends to be a little bit more pruned out, right? We compare it to a less complicated highway. It has less overpasses, less exits, a little less traffic. And we can make these comparisons to show you kind of how the teen brain versus the adult brain, yeah? And there's still some complications or still exits on the adult brain because we never really stop learning. We are always learning new things. So yeah, let's move forward. We will be talking about current drug trends such as alcohol, how it affects the brain. We really wanted to give that baseline and a little bit of the understanding of the teen brain. So we're going to cover how each of these substances affects the brain. We are also going to be talking about vaping, marijuana, and prescription drug use. Okay.
Thanks, Brenda. So this section, what we're going to do is we're going to first cover alcohol. And so with alcohol, this is the first drug trend we talk about. We'll talk a little bit more about the underage drinking, current alcoholic drinks that are common among youth. We kind of look a little bit at the comparison of how non-alcoholic and alcoholic drinks and the marketing and how that affects youth as well. So we know that alcohol comes in a variety of types, which include beer, wine, liquor, and spirits. And drinking too much can take a toll on your body and can affect your brain, heart, liver, pancreas, and your immune system. And it can also be associated with several types of cancer. The first thing we're going to take a look at will be the media and kind of how they're marketing the young teens. So right now we have as we take a look at this slide, we see comparisons of Alka Pops. So on the left side, you see the alcoholic drinks. So these are actually drinks that are sweet, fruit, flavored, usually fizzy. They have high levels of alcohol in them. And many of them, as I mentioned before, are packaged in containers that look very similar to how energy drinks and other sodas or sparkling sodas are packaged. So the left that are the ones that are sold in the stores, and so a lot of times now they're becoming very popular amongst the young. And they have names like White Claws and Trulies. They have been very common to consume. They come in, like I mentioned, a variety of flavors. A lot of them are now putting them with lemonade. You also have the big beer companies like Bud Light, Corona. They're all making all different types of seltzers as well. Now, compared to the non-alcoholic drinks that we've talked about, where there's like bubbly, if you also look, we have Four Loko on the bottom, that's an alcoholic drink, and those are packaged similar to Monster and a lot of the energy drinks that youth have drank before. And so we bring this up because a lot of times as adults, maybe whether you're in the school or a parent, sometimes it can be really hard to identify in the sense of what your child is or what your child or student is really drinking, because you may have, it may be a new energy drink brand that you don't know about, but in all actuality, it is actually an alcoholic drink. So these are some of the marketing tactics that have been used, as well as kind of just to build awareness as to what we may be seeing with our kids having, and being very not aware that they could be alcoholic drinks. And then we want to take a look at alcohol and the brain. We talk about youth who drink alcohol are more likely to experience a variety of these issues, including, sorry, I just lost, I apologize. A variety of these issues, including memory problems, social problems, school problems. And when it comes to social problems, it could be fighting, lack of participation. With school problems, there's maybe a higher absence with poor and failing grades. So it has also been proven that they can have long lasting effects to the brain. And so when we talk about that, we talk about some, in a sense of drinking, and drinking heavily can affect kind of how the brain develops. And so when we say that, it definitely will affect them, even if they're not drinking, it would have a consequence on them as well. Along with some of the other issues, or some of the other studies have shown as well, is that there's a direct correlation between alcohol abuse and dependency as to how early a youth first starts drinking. The earlier they start drinking, the more likely they are to become dependent on alcohol as they get older.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about e-cigarettes and vaping. So e-cigarettes stands for electronic cigarettes, and vaping. We see here many different types of e-cigarettes. We see some tanks, we see some pipes, we see some, the ones that kind of represent the ones that are very famous, right? Like the jewel pods. We see very early in the beginning, the disposable electronic cigarettes all the way over here. These are the ones on the right. They were the very first ones. And then through the years, the market has gotten very creative on how to create new products to, you know, incentivize people to purchase their products. We really want to talk about the ingredients that go in these e-cigarettes and the process on what is vaping, right? What goes inside of these cigarettes is known as e-liquid. Some people call it as e-juice or other names, but e-liquid or e-juice is usually the most common names. These juices, and we'll get into it, the liquids, they're filled with, it could be, you know, nicotine, flavoring, lots and lots of flavoring. We see that propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin are one of the main ingredients in these substances. And what causes harm is when the liquid is heated up and then it's inhaled. Many people call it vaping, right? And we have that misconception that vaping is vapor and it's just vapor, it's just water. However, that's incorrect. When a person uses an electronic cigarette, they're not just vaping water, they're vaping an aerosol. And within this aerosol, there's tons of different chemicals and toxins and nicotine and flavors that are harmful to the body. And we see that although propylene glycol vegetable glycerin might be used in other things that we consume and we ingest, right, we eat, it's very different when you heat this up and you inhale it. You inhale it and it leaves residue and droplets in your lungs, in your body, and other things like that. Okay. Similar to what we showed you in the previous slides, right, we want to compare these e-liquids to common food items, things that we might see children eating, or myself. I really enjoy these Mott's fruit snacks, even as a grown-up. But we see over here on the purple background that these are examples of e-liquids that have been packaged and have been made to look alike, very similar to things that kids use and kids might be appealed to. And we can see that the design is very, very similar. So we really have to keep our eye out to make sure what our students, what our youth, what our youth in our community are using. And here I only have an example of 3 flavors, but in a study done in 2017, we've seen that there was over 15,000 flavors out in the market. Okay, we see that tobacco companies and the industry, they have kind of got on, basically they're replacing the old cigarettes and gone on to this trend of electronic cigarettes. So we see that the companies in the bottom are the traditional cigarettes, and we see that the ones on top, they're owned by the ones in the bottom. And yeah, it's just very interesting how we see that the market is constantly adapting and constantly finding new ways to get new customers. Teens and e-cigs, the nicotine affects memory and attention. As we mentioned in the beginning, the brain is still developing. Our youth's brain doesn't finish developing until they're about 25 years old. So anything that they put into their body is harmful to their body and to their brain development. We see that it affects the memory, it affects the attention, it can be linked to depression. And we see, just as Cami said, the younger a student or a youth uses this substance, the most likely they're going to become dependent to alcohol. Well, we see here that they're 4 times more likely to begin smoking cigarettes if a teenager who uses electronic cigarettes, also known as vapes. And then, as mentioned, the liquid and the heating process and all of that does contain heavy metals and carcinogens that are very harmful to the body, to the brain, and even to those around us. Now, for this image, you may just see a desk with a laptop and some office supplies, right? Well, in this image, there's some, right? There's some electronic cigarettes. I would like for you to take a moment and put in the chat, perhaps take a guess. How many electronic cigarettes do you think are in this image? So I'll wait for a few responses, and Allie or Cami, if you can just read out any of the guesses, that would be great. Maybe you don't see any electronic cigarettes, and maybe that's true. Maybe you see a lot of them. So go ahead and insert a response on how many electronic cigarettes you think are here. Okay.
Allie thinks 6.
Allie thinks 6. Awesome. Thank you, Allie. So let's go ahead and reveal them. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's actually only 5 in this image. I would like for you just to kind of reflect of those whoever did enter a chat or whatever. Were these the ones you spotted? Were these electronic cigarettes the same ones that you thought you saw? As we can see that these electronic cigarettes are easily concealed. They can hide in plain sight. Many times we see that the new ones, like this one right here, that's very popular, similar to Juul, we see that they can be confused with a USB or the one in the pencil holder. Very slim, very sleek. These are very easily hidden. So it's important to stay aware of what they look like, where they may be, so we can spot them and when we need to spot them at the correct moment. We're next going to watch a video. So let's play that. video just really reinforces the idea that it's important to be able to identify these products when they're hidden in our plain sight, right? It made a great comparison between like the different products and the actual things that we use in our everyday life.
So as we looked at those devices, a lot of the devices that can be used with e-cigs with nicotine, and those liquids can also have possible marijuana concentrates that could be used. So there are many different forms and ways of using marijuana, and they can each affect users differently. So marijuana can be rolled up and smoked like a joint, or a blunt. It's also smoked in a pipe or a bong, and some other ways that you can see in some of the pictures here as well are through concentrates and extracts, and those are actually on the rise. So as the concentrates can come into different forms, they all have what is THC, which is the main psychoactive chemical in marijuana. So THC, they're extracted from marijuana as THC concentrates, hash oil, and wax. And so these are derived products, and they have a high dosage of that THC in them. And so as you can see in the image above, again, there are at least 5 different ways that it can be presented in. In addition to the different ways it can be presented, it can be also called many things. So let's see if we can open up that chat again and see what are some common names that you may have heard or hear people call marijuana. So put in some in the chat box, maybe a name or so that you've heard besides marijuana. I know there's a lot out there. I got pot, definitely. Weed, dabs, yes. And anyone else? Thank you for participating. And those are some of the common names we hear. We hear weed, pot, dabs, we hear herb, we hear bud, we hear ganja, Mary Jane. There's so many different names that people use when they're talking about marijuana. And now that they come in all different forms, it can be all different types of things. And so not only can marijuana be smoked, but marijuana can also be an edible. So as we take a look at the edibles, marijuana is also consumable. So it can be in food or beverages that contain marijuana. And the amount of THC in these products are always hard to measure and is not always accurate. So I know people may have been like, oh yeah, I've heard people bring special brownies. And everyone's going to be different on the amount of marijuana they use. Since the effects of edibles take longer, that becomes the other danger with people consuming edibles, is that a lot of times they feel like, oh, I just had one, but I didn't feel anything. And so they're going to keep eating more and more and more. And at that point, because they're going to just get affected later, and it's going to hit a lot harder and be a lot more risky for them. So the effects are different from smoking marijuana, and you have that greater risk of poisoning. And mainly that's just because a lot of people are like, I don't feel any effects. And so they keep consuming them. So some common negative effects when intaking edibles include paranoia, panic attacks, and impaired motor availability. I apologize. So edibles, just like we've talked about with alcohol and e-cigs and how they're packaged, can also be packaged very similar to those of candy bars. And as you see in the pictures that we have on here, you can see they look like gummy bears, chocolates, macaroons, cookies. So they're also, a lot of them are also going to be labeled and packaged, named close to common candy bars that you know, such as Twixt, which is going to be packaged similar to Twix. So they're going to really put a play on a lot of the names when it comes to their packaging and marketing. When we take a look as well as the THC levels comparison, the THC potency is greater today. The concentration levels in marijuana samples are much higher in potency than compared to marijuana samples back in 1995 and even further. So in 1995, a sample of marijuana had a 4% concentration of THC. And today, as an example, a sample of concentrated marijuana called Skywalker holds a high concentration of THC at 85%. So there is a big difference from the levels of THC from, I guess, like years ago. Seems not so long ago, but 95 seems a while ago now. So that levels are very different. So one more thing, when we're in schools or even watching what our children A lot of times they're very fashionable and want to wear the latest trends. Let me know in the chat, A or B. Can you tell which one is a marijuana brand? A or B? And so this can be important. One, not only as a parent buying clothing for their child, but if you are an educator and you are in the school setting, it's really important to know what type of brands and if that's even allowed on campus. A lot of times what will happen with merchandise is that anything with paraphernalia won't be allowed. So if we take a closer look at this, we see that on A is actually a brand called Stizzy, which is a marijuana brand. And on B is Stussy, which has been around for ages and is making its comeback again and being popular and kind of more of like a skater type of brand. And so as you can tell, as we look at other merchandise on our next slide, we see that it's not only just of the t-shirts, you're gonna see marijuana on socks. You will see Weed Maps now is getting some merchandise. So a lot of times, obviously these are big advertising ways for marijuana companies, but it's just also to be aware that they can be found at your local stores. A lot of stores that teens shop at, such as Zoomies, carry these. I actually found them online. You can just order them online and it's not that big of a deal. Or I see a lot of socks with marijuana symbols on them as well. The important thing as well is knowing school district policy, whether you're a staff member, knowing what the students are wearing on campus, or if you're a parent, you definitely don't want to be sending your child to school wearing one of these brands and then they get sent home or they get have to take any disciplinary action with that. So making sure you really understand what they might be wearing, even though it might look cool, they might actually be promoting a brand of marijuana. So other things to really think about is, as we talk about marijuana, it does affect the part of the brain that works on the learning, memory, and attention, and is linked to anxiety, depression, and even schizophrenia. So it has a lot of mental issues that could really be negative for a teen's mental functioning. Using marijuana and driving can increase the risk of crash. Combining with alcohol worsens the risk. Marijuana and alcohol together, not a good combination. And you include driving, definitely not a good combination in any of that. Instead of, we all hear about like drunk driving, which happens a lot, but there's also drug driving. So that's like when you're under the influence of something that can also be very impactful. Okay, so while only 9% of users become dependent, the risk nearly doubles as 17% for those who start as teens. So like we've mentioned before, this is like the importance of making sure teens really understand that the earlier they are, they put themselves at risk at becoming dependent, very similar to how we talked about alcohol and nicotine and e-cigs before. So the next drug, or the last one that, the last substance that we'll be talking about will be prescription drugs. So we're gonna kind of take a look at, prescription drugs are well known and contributing to the opioid crisis that is still ongoing in our community and nationwide. Prescription drugs, as we know, are prescribed to us by doctors to treat a specific illness. However, these drugs have been misused not only by adults, but by our youth. So youth will either find these drugs at home from a friend or even prescribed to them. And all prescription drugs, if you're taken as directed, they serve their purpose, whether it's to treat pain. I know a lot of people will take some drugs for ADHD, anxiety, but once it gets abused and the misusing starts occurring, then they can have severe consequences, from dependency to brain damage and even death. So as we take a look at the different types, so the first picture we have here are the opioids, the opiates, and there are prescription drugs known as Oxycontin, Vicodin, morphine, or codeine. These are the ones that they'll get prescribed for pain management. I got Vicodin when I got my wisdom teeth pulled out. And so I know a lot of people will get their pain meds that way. And what happens is they block the brain's perception of pain. And so because of their pain relief capabilities and the release of dopamine, it is relatively easy for individuals to develop an addiction to these type of painkillers. And because a lot of times these are prescribed after a surgery or something big, they get really accustomed to using them. And although these drugs are safe when used as indicated in their prescription, they can be very dangerous when used in high doses, which is what happens. Even taking one large dose of these medications can cause respiratory failure and death. And the danger of opioids comes even greater when they're used in combination with other substances or alcohol. So really keeping that in mind. And I mean, there is a big crisis around opioids as well. Stimulants, the ones in the middle, you'll see little pills. They are medication that affect people by making them more alert and have more energy. So these drugs are successfully used to treat ADHD, tiredness, fatigue, and depression. So these drugs, you might know them as Adderall, Dexedrine, Ritalin, or Concerta. Drugs in this category can give people a sense of euphoria, which leads to risk of increased dosing. When taken, some stimulants raise blood pressure and heart rate. Taken in large amounts, they can cause irregular heartbeat and even heart failure. So prescriptions also have negative effects of stimulant withdrawals when abused. So a lot of times what teens also think is when you're taking prescription drugs, because these things are prescribed by a doctor, there's like no withdrawal symptoms. If you get addicted to them, you can easily stop. Unfortunately, with most of these prescription drugs, once they're abused and you get addicted to them, their withdrawal symptoms are very similar to those drugs that are more illicit. So what can happen is not only abuse, like fatigue, depression, inability, irregular sleep patterns. A lot of those things can happen. I hear a lot more of stimulant abuse and use when it comes time around midterms or finals or big projects that the students need to get done because it gives them a sense of being able to concentrate. But when they start misusing them, that's where it becomes the real problem. And if it's not prescribed to them, that's also illegal. Then the last set of drugs that we have here are the depressants. So they're often called sedatives or tranquilizers. They pretty much depress the central nervous system. So they slow down the functioning of the brain and can affect people by producing a calm or drowsy feeling. They are used by doctors to treat anxiety and panic attacks. They include barbiturates and benzoids such as Valium, Librium, and Xanax. So the one you probably heard most about would probably be Xanax. I know there's a lot of students, and there was actually a big, I think, incident with Xanax in a school. And so long-term use of this class of medications can lead to dependency or addiction to the other medications of this class. Seizures can occur as a result of withdrawal if people use less of the medication or stop altogether. And this can and have, in some cases, lead to death. So using these are very dangerous to our teens, especially if they're not under any type of doctor watch or anything of that sort. And so then we go into the prescription drug misuse. So I talked a little bit about them before, but when we really talk about misusing and abuse of prescription drugs, it can be dangerous. And there are many ways in which youth can misuse them and many reasons why they might do so. So some ways that prescription drugs may be misused by youth is taking prescription drugs that are not prescribed to them for recreational purposes, such as making lean. So not only can they take prescription drugs on their own, but when they mix it with alcohol or cough syrups or other types of drugs, they can also use that. They also use it to get high. Some of the reasons a young person may choose to try a new drug is because they are experimenting. Maybe they're feeling some pain, they need to relax. I know that our students, a lot of them struggle with anxiety and depression as well, losing weight, focusing better. So a lot of the misinformation about the addictive properties of prescription opioids and perception are that they are less harmful than those that are illicit. And I've mentioned on the last slide that they can have just as bad, not only withdrawals, but issues that come along with misusing drugs. So while this all can be frightening to hear, we will be going over different ways in which we can prevent misuse. Nonetheless, it's not okay. These medicines should only be used if necessary and prescribed by a doctor or licensed pharmacist. So this is one thing we really want to stress with our teens and the youth that we work with, or the children that our children, is really to make sure that they're very aware of who the drugs are prescribed to. There's also possibilities of allergies. We don't know what we're taking. So making sure that we're really aware. I know sometimes I've had students come up to me like, well, my mom gave me this, but it's not mine. So I know that they can be aware of it as well. Just making sure that they are taking the right thing so that they're not harming themselves or becoming addicting.
Thank you for that, Cami. Now we're going to transition to the next section of this presentation. We're really going to talk about how to talk with students. We'll be talking about protective factors and then some resources that may help you. And then we'll provide you with our contact information should you have further questions. So first, we're going to start with the protective factors. We've discussed risk factors, but now we're going to talk about protective factors, and these are some, right? So providing a positive support system for the youth in our life could look something like being as an adult in their life, right? Providing support for them when they need it. We can have the anti-drug use policy in our home, in our classroom, in our schools, around us. Encouraging students to be part of extracurricular activities. We see that students that are in clubs and sports and things like that are less likely to have that risk of abusing or misusing or increased substance abuse. We see change in social perception, right? Have the students understand the harmful effects of these substances and how it can cause damage to their brain and to their health and just overall their future and everything that we've discussed. Social skills could be a protective factor by teaching students on how to cope with their emotions, how to cope when they're in stressful situations, or just how to speak up when they don't want to do something. Many times, a child or a youth or a student might think that saying no is the only way, but we have to show them or teach them that there's many different ways on how we can say no. We can say no by providing an alternative and giving an excuse or providing a reason or just different things, right? That's part of social skills. And then school connectedness, or just connectedness to the community, to the school, having them build relationships with people around them, with the adults, with the students, that they know that they can go and talk to and have a trusted person when they need someone. We see that it's important for them to have future goals. If we have the students establish future goals, then we can always remind them and encourage them to always work towards that. And being drug-free would be one major step to get to their future goals. Ways on how you can help as an adult in a child's or a youth's life would be raising awareness, right? Promoting drug-free campuses or communities. This could be your church, your sports club, wherever you are the adult in the youth's life, right? We see staying up to date with current drug trends, just like you're doing now. The information you use today, you'll be able to use it in your classroom or use it around youth because you're more aware of how electronic cigarettes can be easily disguised, and we understand just different drug trends that are currently happening. And as we mentioned, the market is very, very, keeps up with the trends and tries to come up with new products just to get people and youth and more business. Host discussions. Don't be afraid to start a conversation with the youth today. Hey, what have you heard about vaping? And you can then explain to them, well, did you know it's not just water vapor, it's actually aerosol? So just having these conversations with students and allowing them to communicate with you would be a great start on how we can help our youth. We can set up role play scenarios with real life situations. Practice, practice, practice is what we tell our students when we're in the classroom. We tell them that the more they practice on how to say no, it'll be easier when they're actually faced with that situation, when they actually do have to say no to refusing a substance. Incorporate social skills, right? Goal setting, as we mentioned, and positive coping skills. Be that trusting adult for the youth. Be that trusting adult. I cannot emphasize that more. Have these conversations with them, and then just, foster strong relationships at school and beyond. Okay. We see some of the talking points that we can have with the youth in our life could be these, right? Again, the goals, asking them, what would you like to be when you grow up? Or do you have a goal to make a certain sports team or pass this test? Or having these goals and dreams and having these talking points with them will remind them that they need to stay healthy, they need to live a drug and substance-free life. And in order to achieve these goals and dreams, we really want to focus on the brain development. We want to remember those key points that our brain develops from back to front, and the front is really important for decision making, and that our brain isn't fully developed until we're about 25 years old. So it's important to remember that, again, substances introduced to the body can really harm the brain while it's developing. We understand that the earlier the use, the higher chances of greater dependence and use of long term. And just because something may be advertised or may appear as less harmful does not mean safe. And I'm specifically talking about electronic cigarettes in this case. Many people think, well, it's a safer alternative to using cigarettes. It's not safer. It's not safe. Just because it might appear less harmful does not mean it's safe. And then we see also that it's important to talk about expectations. Yeah. So if we're in our classroom, we expect students to talk about certain things, or we expect them to behave a certain way, and having these agreements with them also. Okay. We do have this link of resources, and we will go ahead and paste that in the chat now. And in this bit.ly, we have all of our amazing resources for parents and staff and just any adult that may want information on current drug trends and just other information like that. So it'll be pasted in the chat. Oh, I think you're muted, Kim.
Okay. Thank you, Brenda. Those are some great points that you've mentioned about how we're able to really talk to the students that we work with, or our kids and our homes. And so another resource that we have here, along with the resources on that link, are different activities. So I know this is classroom activity resources, but these resources can actually be used in a variety of ways, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's your family, or whether it's yourself, just learning more about prevention and learning more about drugs. And so we highlight 4 of them here. The first one is Mind Matters, and this one is it's available online or in hard copy. But this one is actually from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So this one, they call it NIDA. This is their curriculum that they promote and they use, and it definitely even has really good breakdowns of the different drugs and really good drug facts as well. Then there's also the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. And that one has a self-paced online course that you could really look into. And that's through stanford.edu. Then you have the Get Smart About Drugs, which is also a government site, which has lesson and activities. So that one, when I've explored it, it has a lot of different lesson plans, but it also has a lot of activities. And these activities can be done at the home. So with your family, with your kids, if they're bored one day, or they don't want to Zoom, or they finish Zooming and all their homework, there's different worksheets, different activities that can really enhance learning about the different drugs. And then OCDE, we have our own Red Ribbon campaign. So Red Ribbon is a big thing in October, and that's a big awareness campaign, and that's nationally as well. But if you were to look into this site here, it's a Canvas course kind of a thing, but it shows you different types of activities, presentations, resources, and it has a plethora of information on there as well. And then our last type of resources that we have for you are, there are normally links to these, but these are really the main websites that we find. The DEA would give you the breakdown of drugs and facts and different things that you may see. You can literally go to their site, pick what drug you want to learn about, and it'll drop down a bunch of information for you. Just as the partnership, it's drugfree.org. That one is also a lot of information. The NIDA has their own. So NIDA it's great. They have their Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was muted. They have their site, which was really tailored towards more of an adult kind of thing. But they also have their teen. So they have a teen.drugabuse.gov, and that website is very much tailored towards the teens. They have interactive games on there, and they have a whole bunch of different aspects that can be a lot more visual and more exciting for teens to use and kind of go through. So if you think, you know, your child needs a little more information, you can always go to that site, and they have a lot of different activities that can be done. And then there's the abovetheinfluence.com, and that one is just really making sure people understand that message, understand what staying above the influence really means, and how it can be beneficial for them. And the what's the good part about it? It's like social norms. It's like promoting being above the influence. So on this slide here, this really is our contact information. You have Brenda and I today, but we work with a great team. Our ALD team, you can contact any one of us and they will definitely provide you with any answers, any questions that you might have, or anything of that sort. Brenda, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I'm actually about to post in the chat. We do have a brief post survey for everyone that participated today. If you can just please go in the chat and go to that link and then just let us know how we did today, how the content was. It's a few minutes, doesn't take too long. We would greatly appreciate it. And with that, if anyone else, if anyone has questions or comments, you can go ahead and ask them in the chat, unmute yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with, or if you'd like to reach out to one of us via email. Here you have all of my colleagues, Maria, Michael, Cami, and myself, our email. So feel free to reach out to us or anything you would like to do, or if you have any questions about anything. And we definitely would like to thank you very much today for your time here today, for the interest in learning about current and new drug trends. And we hope that we provided you with some new information.
Wow, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. I know I learned a lot, so I can only imagine that the rest of the participants learned a lot as well. If you, as the guests, have any questions for our two fantastic speakers, put them in the chat and I'll be happy to ask them and get some answers. We have about 10 minutes left of the workshop. So I have a couple of quick questions while our guests think if they have anything they'd like you to address. So first of all, I'm wondering if you guys could give an example of what a conversation with a teen or youth who you feel might be at risk for drug use, what would a conversation with them possibly look like? Would you be able to give us an example of that?
So go ahead, Cami. So Ali, just to, can you repeat the question? Was having a conversation with the teen that we believe might be at risk using, right? I would definitely encourage them to reach out to resources that can help them if they're interested in help with quitting or just professional help. I'd definitely have them reach out to the resources in their community, in their area, that can definitely help them with that.
And going along what Brenda said, definitely, I think the biggest thing is when they're talking to us. So they're like thinking of us as a trusted adult. So that in a sense is also great. We can help them work through maybe some of the issues that they may be having. We can really talk about why they may be kind of leaning towards drugs and alcohol, what really is the root of their problem. And therefore we can also provide hopefully resources or help to help them in that sense. So maybe it's not the drugs and alcohol, or maybe it is. Maybe it's something deeper that we can really help them walk through and be there to help guide them. I think a lot of the conversation is just going to kind of be where they at, how they're feeling, what if there's any trauma or anything that they've been experiencing. And I think that's kind of how we would guide that and to see how we could best help them.
Thank you. That's really helpful. There's a question in the chat. Stephanie has asked, are there any organizations working to stop alcohol and vape companies from using their deceptive and lethal marketing to youth?
I think one that we came across of as, I know like, I think it's a California tobacco organization, because for a while they were actually promoting tobacco. Thank you, Stephen. Tobacco-free kids. They were promoting different types of flavoring when it came to a lot of the e-cig stuff, and that's kind of had a halt as well. So there have been organizations out there that have been stopping or trying to stop companies from coming up with these and marketing these products.
Thank you. Another question is, so you've mentioned that children or youth who use drugs and alcohol in this way, they're more vulnerable to, certain things. So this conference is themed around human trafficking and exploitation. So I'm wondering if you'd agree that using drugs and alcohol, like you've mentioned, does that make the children or the teenagers especially more vulnerable to being trafficked in particular?
I personally do agree with that statement, Ali. I believe that when youth, they're already, they're already in a state where they're very vulnerable to falling into peer pressure, social media pressures, and just pressures around us. And when we add these substances to their body, it can definitely increase the vulnerability of them being part of that human trafficking and falling into other areas that can cause, long-term effects. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Cami, do you have any thoughts on that?
Pretty much what Brenda summed up. We just are working with a population that is going through a lot of transition, a lot of different variables and issues that they are working with on their own. So it definitely makes them a vulnerable population. So yeah, so pretty much in agreeing to what Brenda had mentioned as well.
And one last question from me. Do you think that COVID-19 has made teenagers more likely to use drugs or alcohol and be vulnerable in that way?
I definitely do think that COVID-19 did add to stressors that youth were facing. With one big one was not being able to go to school on campus, right? Sometimes teens use that as a way to interact with people or to have their trusted adult. Maybe their teacher is their trusted adult or their counselor is a trusted adult. So being away from that, definitely, I think, could have impacted and increased the youth substance use at home, just because there was those added stressors. Also, kind of mentioning again what Cami mentioned in the beginning was the accessibility to these substances. Unfortunately, many parents had, were essential workers in our communities and they had to go to work, but we do see that we have, the alcohol in the fridge, or maybe there's prescription drugs somewhere and they have access to these. So I definitely do agree that I think that COVID-19 did have an impact on our youth substance use.
I agree with Brenda. I definitely think that these added stressors, being on Zoom or having to log into school, not having the interactions with their friends that they normally would on a daily basis, not being able to maybe play sports that normally keep them busy, finding that they have a lot of extra time on their hands is the other thing, and having things in their house. Prescription drugs can be just in your medicine cabinet in the bathroom. If you have older grandparents or parents or siblings that need prescription drugs, they can be very easily accessible. And definitely, I think just having the stressors plus a little bit of extra time on their hands, not being able to really go anywhere, and possible of no adults parental supervision, that can definitely play a part into these times of them using more during COVID.
Thank you so much for that input. I think I loved this presentation. I was so thankful to get to be the moderator for these wonderful speakers. Um, this is such an important topic, especially when we talk about what makes teens and youth vulnerable and what can lead them to being exploited in a variety of ways or being put in situations where they're at risk. So thank you so much for speaking today. Guests, if you have any other questions, you can throw them in the chat last minute and we can answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up here and just say a great big thank you. The Global Center and all the Ensure Justice guests are very thankful to have had you speak today and thankful for this workshop. We're really thrilled to have this opportunity to hear from you. So thank you again.